Hey friends, back for another short episode of The Nerdy Pastor. I thought today I would take just 10, 12 minutes to talk about reading books together as a church. And again, we mean, of course, the Bible, yes, and Bible studies, those are important, but also good Christian literature as a church and kind of creating a culture of literacy in church and folks that engage. And I think a culture of literacy tends to lend itself to biblical literacy as well because we believe in our people of the book. So it actually lends itself to reading the Bible. I think a good catalyst to see is how much does your church read the Bible in general? Do they follow the text when you are reading it from the pulpit? Do you follow the text when it's being read from the pulpit and preached? Or do you just kind of sit back casually and listen, which that's fine from time to time, but are you following along? Are you literate in what the Bible is saying? Are you engaging, I think, the literature of the church, which is primarily the scriptures, but there are many other fantastic classic works to use and to utilize to accentuate and to support and to help apply the scriptures in life. So I've always enjoyed leading reading groups. I've got I think, a helpful video on reading groups and the purpose of them. But I just thought I would recommend a few books that could be used as church-wide reading tools that I've used in the past. As opportunities for you, if you are an elder or a pastor or an influential church member who could lead something like this. And I think the goal of this is to set kind of a culture for the gospel and the gospel's application in your life. And some of these books are very helpful in doing the application of the gospel to Christian living. And so, church-wide reading groups, what I mean by that is kind of setting aside, whether it's a Sunday night or a Wednesday night or some time that most of the church can get together, or a Sunday morning kind of during a Sunday school hour or something like that. It's good to offer these kind of studies as a complement to Bible studies, okay, to theological teaching. It's good to offer kind of literacy and literature studies as well, because people need that help in a very media driven, image driven culture. They need leadership that will do that, because if not, they won't do it themselves very often unless they're, pretty disconnected from the modern age and digital forms of communication, and they just use hardback books and things like that themselves. Most culture is very disconnected from hardback books, from hardback literature, from basically something that's not digital. So it'll have to be led before people just kind of gravitate towards it. So I think this is a good complementary way of educating and cultivating discipleship in your church. And I really think if the church would do this, it would really help the church's discipleship, and also, I think, instill a culture of the gospel and also a culture of learning and continuing education as well. And again, Jesus says in the Great Commission to teach them all I've commanded you. So it's not just this kind of one and done thing, and then here's some principles to kind of make your marriage better. Look, I'm all for like improving marriages and improving families and all these things, but the gospel has to lead all these things. And there needs to be a intelligent way of engaging this. So I think this is a complementary way of growing alongside good Bible studies, good theological teaching, and setting aside maybe a Sunday morning kind of Sunday school, or a Wednesday night or a Sunday night to do church-wide reading groups. I really think this is helpful because it engages the church to read. People that would never read a book might read a book if someone who's fired up about it actually does a good job of leading it. And they'll suddenly start to see a window into new opportunities to grow themselves. And there's a lot of ways that church members can feed themselves, which is one of the things we all want the most, right? To feed themselves when they know where to go to get good books and good literature. So let me give you a few examples of some good church-wide reading books. And these are examples of kind of different kinds of books that would be helpful. Not just these books in particular, but some particular kind of principles of good books for church-wide reading. And then I'll give you some practical examples of how I do it in my church. Last summer, I did a reading group of about 30 people through this Puritan paperback, The Rare Jewel of Christian contentment. And Jeremiah Burroughs, which is, he's one of the greatest, I think, Puritans. Wasn't a Presbyterian, but was kind of a hair's breadth to being a Presbyterian. He was an independent minister in England, 17th century, in even a little earlier than that, I believe, if I remember correctly. I think he was 15. I can't remember if the book tells us exactly the dates. Yeah, 1599. He didn't live super long, but he's in the early first half of the 17th century in England, and part of course the nonconformist movement that was rebelling against the kind of both the Catholic and the Anglicized kind of Anglican Church, Church of England, kind of usurping of power and dominating piety and religion in the time, and during that Puritan age of 1620 to the late 1680s primarily. But his book is just fantastic. I mean, it's incredible. It's really one of the top devotional books I think anyone can read. It's not necessarily the easiest to read because of the old kind of antiquated language, which my group talked to me often about how this is so weird, this language. I'm like, just learn to read something that's not easy per se, because the concepts and the principles are so treasured and powerful in the gospel. And they made it all the way through a 200 something page book, and they did a great job. But 30 folks in our church did that book and on Wednesday night, and they're still talking about it now, a year later, because of how good the book is. I mean, there's a reason that book has been published for 4 centuries almost. So again, good devotional book. And I think the principle of this as a book for church-wide reading is the series called The Puritan. Here it is, The Puritan Paperbacks. There are, I think, almost 70 different Puritan paperbacks now that you could choose from. Not all of them are church-wide issues or church-wide kind of gathering books that would kind of gather a big group to come together to read. But there's probably 10 or 15 that are fantastic as books that could do that. I'm about to do a book by John Bunyan here, though this book is not a Puritan paperback. He has 5 or 6 Puritan paperbacks himself. But these are good books for kind of church-wide reading groups because of the devotional fervency and the piety of the book and the theological accuracy and the pastoral warmth. These are all written by pastors. Most of them were pastors. Some of them were more academics, like John Owen. But most of them were pastoral and are very warm in nature, very fervent. There's a lot of heat in these books too. So that's an example. A Puritan paperback is a fantastic book to take your church through. Another example, I don't have the book on me right now, but I took the last church I worked at. I took maybe one of my favorite books of all time, The Crook in the Lot by Thomas Boston. I took almost 50 people on Sunday morning through The Crook in the Lot by Thomas Boston. 50 people in our church were interested to come at 9 o'clock in the morning to read through this book and talk about it. And this is challenging theological stuff about the sovereignty of God and suffering and the difficult, it's what's called the crook, mean the path, in the lot, in the way that the place you are in life. So again, the principle of these books are very helpful. You don't have to use exactly those books, but they're extremely helpful for church-wide reading to cultivate a culture of literacy, of education. Christians have got to be intelligent, not just pious, okay? At the same time, we don't want to overemphasize intelligence to become almost intellectualism or maybe academic kind of academia in the church, in the sense there's good place for scholarship in the church, but not at the expense of devotion and practice. And we always want to balance that out. So again, these are not challenging books in the sense that they're academic texts. They might be challenging theologically and practically, but they're not academically challenging. Okay, so those are 2 examples of good books to maybe use for church-wide reading. And again, I would really recommend this happening seasonally. Maybe not every single semester, like fall, spring, summer, but seasonally, like once a year, or a couple times a year at different times, kind of engaging the church in the habits of reading and feeding oneself with good literature. Another book I led 15 folks. This was a little bit more niche on purpose. This was a little bit more academic for sure, but it was meant to challenge folks that wanted more challenge. So we have 15 to 20 folks engage The Wonderful Works of God by Herman Bavinck, and I got 15 or 20 people to come regularly on Thursday morning at 6:30 in the morning to do this book. I had folks that were both elders in our church, some deacons in our church, and folks that were just lay people in our church. I mean, got up for the entire summer to read a 550-page book on the wonderful works of God. And it was incredible, the discussions that we got to have together with that. Well, the book I'm about to start in, I think, 3 weeks now, is, of course, my favorite book apart from Scripture, The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, who is my favorite writer, again, apart from the Bible. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I won't go into all that right now because this is not a book about video about John Bunyan. But The Pilgrim's Progress is a very wide, kind of mainstream Christian classic that just a lot of people have never read. They've just not read the book. They know about it. They've heard about it. There's been some illustrations they've probably heard from it, or some scenes that have been referenced that they've heard about before, maybe in sermons or teachings, but they've actually never sat down to read the book. Again, the reason for this is because Christians have become less and less readers, just like the culture has become less and less readers. And it becomes what happens, this happens all the time in Christian history, then Christians become just pious and they lose the intellectual fervor they're called to have. And so I think it's really important for us to remember we are called to intelligent Christianity. We are called to intelligible and also literate Christianity. Otherwise, Christianity, I think, is very in danger of becoming a folk kind of religion where it's basically kind of there's some beliefs about Jesus, but they're kind of mixed into kind of cultural, kind of folk myths and homespun wisdom, and it becomes very dangerous to dissect Christ in any way from Scripture itself, and it becomes dangerous to dissect Christianity from church history. Okay, and I think both of those are in danger if we're not engaging classic Christian works by classic Christian authors who have a wonderful way of applying the truths of Scripture to everyday living. And The Pilgrim's Progress, a middle schooler can read. Okay, I mean, I read there's a wonderful book that came out. I cannot remember the publisher. I think it might be Reformation Heritage. I cannot remember who published this book, but The Pilgrim's Progress, that was created for children, called Little Pilgrim's Progress, which is a fantastic book that is made for children with animals. So the animals are the characters, and it was amazing. It just captivates the minds of people when you read through this book, whether the little children's version or the normal version or some version in between. It captures the imagination and also teaches good, rigorous theology through illustration and allusion and allegory, and it teaches all these things, and it fires up ignites the imagination in the Christian life, which I think Christians have lost their imagination. And I think these kind of books retrieve how do I think and imagine life as a Christian, and books like this really help us to engage in that way of living. So I really want to promote a way of encouraging churches to read books together, not just Bible studies. Again, this is not to take the place of Bible studies. This is not to take the place of theological teaching or anything like that, but to come alongside in a complementary way, in a like kind of a more mainstream Christian way of engaging people with literature again, classic Christian literature, and doing it church-wide. So use books that have broad appeal, can bring people in, get them to read. And when they read, they're going to read more of the Bible. I promise you that. And most of the time, these groups will attract Bible readers as well. So you'll get kind of from both sides, high readers, engaged readers, Bible readers, and non-readers. And that's what you want to minister to the entire church that way. So I really want to encourage you to think about that, about a church-wide kind of group of reading seasonally to complement how you do ministry to your church. And I think it's a fantastic way to build literacy, continue education, love of the gospel, a healthy imagination for the truths of the scriptures and how you live and want to live it out. And it's fun. It's fun to talk about good truth with other believers instead of just doing it yourself in your study or in your devotionals. Those are needed, but it's good to complement it with this. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it'll inspire some of you to pursue this in your churches, whether you're an officer in a church, a lay leader in a church, or just someone who's fired up to do something. I hope it'll encourage you. All right, signing off.